Texas Hill Country. April 1879, the bells of St. Agnes rang loud across the limestone ridge as Tamarra Sutton gripped the edge of the wagon bench, her knuckles white, her veil soaked through with sweat. She was 22, and today she was supposed to marry a man 3 times her age. A man her father said God had chosen for her, a man the church had promised her to since she was 16. But Tamarra was not a promise. She was not a possession. And she was not going to be handed off like land. The wedding guests had not yet arrived when she climbed down from the wagon and ran. Her boots kicked up dust as she tore through the brush behind the chapel, ducking under mesquite branches, heart pounding like thunder in her ears. She did not look back. 2 hours later, she had no idea where she was, only that her dress was ripped at the hem, her water skin was almost empty, and the sun had begun its slow descent westward. She leaned against a rock outcrop, breathing hard, her body trembling. A distant sound broke through the silence, a horse. She froze, eyes scanning the horizon. A rider approached from the south, tall in the saddle, broad in the shoulders, slow in his pace. Dust clung to his shirt and hat. A rifle was strapped to his saddle and a rope hung coiled near his hip. He saw her. He slowed. "Ma'am," his voice was steady, not hurried, but it carried. She pushed herself upright, chin up. "I am not lost," she said. He tilted his head. "Didn't ask if you were." She stepped forward, wary but tired. "I just need water." He dismounted in one smooth motion and reached into a saddlebag, pulling out a canteen. He handed it over without a word. She drank, slow and grateful. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed. "I'm Nolan Keene," he said, "headed west to Bandera." "You from around here?" Tamarra hesitated. "I was supposed to be married today, but I ran." He nodded once, like that made perfect sense. "You got a place to go?" "No." "Well," Nolan said, voice low, "you got a choice. I can ride on and you can take your chances with the coyotes and the dusk. Or I can take you with me. I got work on a cattle ranch west of here. Owner owes me a favor." She watched him. There was no pressure in his face, no judgment, just the quiet patience of someone who had seen hard things and chose not to make them harder. "Why would you help me?" He looked her straight in the eye. "Because the church might have said you were promised, but I say you are not property." Tamarra's throat tightened. She nodded. They rode together as the light fell gold across the ridges. He let her ride his horse while he walked, leading the reins, keeping pace beside her. He asked nothing, offered little, but his presence steadied her. That night they camped in a small clearing near a creek. Nolan built the fire, careful and quiet. Tamarra sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. "I was 16, she said, her voice low, "when Father Barlow told my parents I'd been chosen for Mr. Alder, said he was a man of God, said it was a blessing." Nolan didn't speak. "He's 58, she whispered. "Owns half the county. My father signed the papers before I even knew what was happening." Nolan tossed a twig into the flames. "You got away, that matters." She looked at him. "What if they come after me?" "They will," he said, "but they will not find you." She studied his face. There was something worn there, something old in his eyes despite him being young, 30, maybe 31, a man who had seen war or loss or both. "Have you ever run from something?" she asked. Nolan's gaze stayed on the fire. "Once, when I was 19, left a girl behind in Georgia. She was too good for me. I thought leaving was protecting her." "Did you ever go back?" He shook his head. "By the time I figured out I was wrong, she was married to someone else." Tamarra looked down at her hands. "I do not want to belong to anyone." "You should not have to," Nolan said. She lifted her eyes. "Not even you," he met her gaze. "Especially not me." Their silence stretched between them, quiet and full. Then she smiled, small and real. The next few days passed in steady miles and quiet company. Nolan taught her how to hold the reins properly, how to watch the sky for weather shifts, how to recognize deer tracks from wild hogs. He never touched her without reason, never looked at her like she owed him anything. Tamarra found herself watching him when he worked the fire, when he checked their path, when he slept with one hand on his rifle. He moved like he belonged to the land, like nothing could shake him. By the time they reached the ranch, she knew more than she had ever known about him, that he had no family left, that he had fought in the war and hated every bit of it, that he never stayed too long in one place, but he always paid his debts. The rancher, a kind man with a white beard and a limp, gave Tamarra a job in the kitchen and Nolan a bunk in the barn. Weeks passed. She cooked. He drove cattle. They ate together when they could, talked when there was time, and still he never asked for anything. It was late June when it happened. She was standing on the porch after supper, watching the stars come out when Nolan stepped up beside her. "You ever think about leaving here?" he asked. She nodded. "Sometimes, but not alone." He looked at her then, really looked. "I would go anywhere with you, Tamarra." Her heart beat hard against her ribs. "I do not belong to anyone," she said. "I know," he said, "but I would still ask." She stepped closer. "Then ask." His voice was soft. "Will you come with me, not because you have to, not because I saved you, but because you want to?" She touched his chest, just above his heart. "Yes." He kissed her that night beneath the stars, slow and sure, his hands gentle on her waist. It was the first time she had ever been touched without fear. In the days that followed, they spoke of a small patch of land near the river, of a house they could build, of horses and chickens and maybe, someday, children. She was not a promise anymore, she was free. And she was in love. By mid-July, the sun held long in the sky, stretching shadows thin across the dry pasture where the cows moved like slow breath. Tamarra had taken to rising before first light, her hands wrapped around the handle of the pump as she filled buckets for the kitchen's wash basin. She hadn't been asked to. She just liked the quiet before the ranch stirred, the sky still bruised with dawn, the world not yet asking anything of her. She'd started wearing trousers beneath her skirts when she worked borrowed from the rancher's widowed daughter, who had long since outgrown them, and tied her hair back with a strip of calico she'd torn from her old wedding dress. The lace had burned weeks ago, a quiet fire behind the smokehouse, but the cotton she'd saved, repurposing it like a life she no longer needed. Nolan found her one morning kneeling beside the garden rose, pulling weeds in silence. She didn't look up until his bootsteps stopped near the edge of the fence, his hat in his hand. "There's a cabin," he said, 3 miles west, tucked near the pecan grove, been empty since the widow who lived there passed last spring. I rode by after branding yesterday, roof solid, needs cleaning. But it's standing." Tamarra straightened, wiping her palms against her thighs. "She have kin, none that claim it. Rancher said it's just been sitting. I asked if we might use it." Her brows lifted. "Use it how? Make it ours if you want it." She studied him. "You're asking me to live with you. I'm asking if you'd like a home that's yours, one you can lock from the inside, one no man can come into without your say." She rose fully, brushing dirt from her knees. "And if I say yes, I'll put the work in, make it livable, bring water to it. Build what's missing." She nodded once. "Then I say yes." They walked it together that afternoon, the trail narrow with cedar limbs and deer sign. The cabin stood low and square, its door hung crooked on rusted hinges, but the walls were tight and the hearth still black with use. A wasp nest clung to the eave and the windows were clouded with dust, but Tamarra stepped inside and stood in the middle of the room, turning slow. "This is enough," she said. Nolan stood in the doorway, watching her. "You sure?" "I don't need more than space to breathe." That night they didn't kiss, they didn't touch. He walked her back to the bunkhouse porch and tipped his hat, and she watched him go, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. By August, they had scrubbed the floors with vinegar and boiled water. Tamarra stitched muslin into curtains while Nolan patched the back wall where termites had chewed through one of the joists. Neither of them spoke of what they were building, not in words. But their hands moved with purpose, and their silences deepened. One evening, as the cicadas droned and the heat clung stubborn to the trees, Nolan appeared at the back of the cabin with a tin box in hand. "I found something," he said, "in the barn's rafters. Thought you might have use for it." She opened the lid and found a set of hand-carved spoons, worn but whole. One had initials MR burned into the handle. "Think she made these?" Tamarra asked, maybe, or someone made them for her. Either way, they were left behind. She traced the smallest spoon with her thumb. Not everything left behind is lost. No, he said. Some things are waiting to be claimed. She looked up. You ever think about what you left behind? He leaned against the doorframe. Sometimes. But I don't look too long. Nothing worth remembering was ever left behind by accident. She nodded, then closed the lid. That week, they slept on a straw mattress Nolan bartered for in town, their bed tucked against the wall where the morning light came in easy. Tamarra kept her own blanket at first, laying it over the straw with space between. But on the fourth night, a storm rolled in low and sudden, and the wind rattled the shutters until she sat up, heart thudding. Nolan rose without a word, checked the latch, then sat beside her on the edge of the mattress. It's just wind, he said. Won't come near. I know, she whispered, but it sounds like doors slamming. He didn't ask whose doors or why she knew the sound so well. Just reached for her hand and held it between both of his, rough and warm. You don't have to be afraid in this place, he said. Not ever again. She leaned into him, her forehead against his shoulder. After a while, the wind passed. In the morning, she found a sprig of sage beside her cup, not fresh but carefully dried, wrapped in a twist of twine. She hadn't seen Nolan gather it. He hadn't said a word. She tucked it above the hearth, and when he came in from checking the fence line, she caught his hand before he could pass her. I want to plant things, she said. He looked down at their joined hands. What kind of things? Beans, maybe squash. Something that grows slow but feeds you all the same. I'll clear the ground, he said. That night they lay closer. Her head on his chest, her legs tucked beside his. No words between them, but her hand rested over his heart and stayed there until morning. Their days grew full with the quiet rhythm of making something from nothing. A shelf here, a bench there, water hauled by bucket, wood stacked by the door. At night they sat on the steps and watched the stars blink out one by one. No vows were spoken. No priest called. But the way she looked at him when he handed her a cup of coffee, the way he brushed the hair from her temple when she read aloud from an old almanac, those things were promises. Quiet, steady, unshakable, they were not made of ceremony, they were made of choice. By early September, the pecan shells had begun to fall, cracking open in the dust like promises broken too long ago to remember. Tamarra stood beneath the largest tree behind the cabin, skirt tucked up into her belt as she filled her apron with the fallen nuts. The air held the first whisper of cooler days, but the heat still clung to the soil, stubborn as old grief. Nolan rode back from town just past sundown, his horse lathered from the climb and his eyes sharper than usual. He dismounted without speaking, tied the reins, and walked toward her with something folded under his arm. She straightened, brushing her hands clean. You're late, she said. Had to wait on the post rider, he answered, holding out the envelope. She took it with careful fingers. The wax seal was unfamiliar. When she opened it, her pulse slowed, then quickened again, sharp and cold. She read the writing 3 times before lowering it. Father Barlow sent it, she said, voice flat. They're petitioning the sheriff in Fredericksburg. Claiming I've been taken against my will. Nolan didn't flinch. They have no right. They think they do, she said, folding the letter. He used phrases like moral abduction and female corruption. He looked toward the horizon, jaw tight. It's bluster. They've got no law on their side. They've got money, she said. A name that folks listen to. He shook his head. You're not going anywhere you don't choose. She didn't cry, just leaned against the tree trunk and looked at the sky through the branches. I thought they'd forget me, she said after a moment. People like that don't let go easy, Nolan said. They think letting go means losing face. She glanced at him, the last light catching the side of his face. You're not worried? I've seen men like Barlow. Relying on fear to make the world easier to control. And if they come, he stepped toward her then, slow and sure. Then we make them look you in the eye, we make them see you're not the same girl they tried to own. She nodded once, and that was enough. The next day, Nolan rode to the edge of the property and spoke to the rancher. By supper, a letter was sent to the county office, notarized and clear. Tamarra Sutton was of age, free in mind and body and living by her own will. Nothing more needed saying. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the porch with her knees drawn up and her shawl wrapped tight, eyes fixed on the dark line of the trees. Nolan joined her near midnight without a word, just sat beside her and rested his hand lightly over hers. "I was afraid I'd always be looking over my shoulder," she said quietly. "You still might," he answered, "but not alone." They stayed that way until the first bird stirred. The letter changed things, not between them but around them. Word came through the ranch hands that men had ridden through the nearby town asking questions. Tamarra didn't go to market anymore. Nolan handled the errands, moving through town like a shadow, quiet and unreadable. One evening, he returned with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the table and nodded toward it. "I figured you should have something of your own," he said. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small revolver, the finish worn, the grip smooth from use. "I don't want to shoot anyone," she said. "You might not have to," he replied, "but wanting and needing aren't always the same." She picked it up, tested the weight. He showed her how to hold it, how to reload. They practiced behind the cabin, aiming at pine knots nailed to a fence post. She wasn't quick, but she was steady and her hands didn't shake. Later, while oiling the cylinder, she asked, "Did you ever kill anyone?" His breath came slow. "During the war and once after." "A man who tried to take something that wasn't his." She looked at him then. "You think I'd be changed if I did what needed doing?" "You'd still be you," he said. "Just more of yourself than you were before." She turned the gun in her hands. "Then I'll be ready." The days shortened. The leaves browned. One morning, the ground was cool beneath her bare feet, and the first fire of the season was laid in the hearth. Nolan chopped wood while she boiled beans and baked cornbread in the Dutch oven. They ate by lantern light, and when the flame flickered low, he reached for her hand without hesitation. "Do you want to be married?" he asked. She looked at him, brow furrowing. "I mean by papers and a name," he clarified. "Not a preacher, not the church. Just the two of us, saying it plain." She didn't answer right away. Then, "You want my name?" He smiled, soft and sure. "I want your life beside mine. Whatever name you wear's just the handle of it." She pulled her chair closer. "Then yes, but not because it proves anything. Just because I want to wake up every day knowing you're mine." He leaned forward, kissed her slow. They were married 3 days later beneath the branches of the same pecan tree where she'd gathered nuts. The rancher signed as witness. There was no dress, no ribbon, just her hand in his and the sky wide above. That night they lay in their bed as the wind moved through the trees. Tamarra rested her head against Nolan's chest. "I never thought I'd feel this," she said. "What?" he asked. "Safe." He stroked her hair, slow and quiet. "Then I'll keep it for you every day." She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of pine and wood smoke, and for the first time since she'd run, she dreamed of nothing but peace. The first frost came, quiet, white dust settling over the grass like a held breath. Tamarra woke early, the air sharp enough to see inside, and found Nolan already outside, hauling the last of the firewood beneath the lean-to. His breath plumed in the pale light as he worked, sleeves rolled past his elbows, hands red from the cold. She stepped onto the porch, shawl wrapped tight. "We'll need more blankets if this keeps up." He glanced over. "There's a trapper comes through Careville every October. Might have pelts to trade. I can ride in before week's end." "I'll come with you," she said. He paused, then nodded once. "We'll leave after morning chores." They rode out under a sky the color of tin, the trail narrow where the trees hadn't yet let go of their leaves. Tamarra sat straight in the saddle, her hands sure on the reins. She didn't speak much on the trail, but Nolan watched the way she scanned the woods, how she kept her rifle tied close now, not for show but from instinct. Careville was louder than she remembered, wagons clattering over the packed street, voices rising from the saloon and smithy. A boy no older than 12 ran past with a string of dried apples in one hand and a slingshot in the other. Tamarra watched him disappear behind a wagon. Nolan tied the horses near the mercantile and offered his hand. She took it, stepping down without hesitation. Inside, the trapper was already unpacking beaver, fox, a single thick buffalo hide folded over a crate. "Trade or coin?" he asked without looking up. Nolan nodded toward the hide. "What for that?" $3 or something worth more. Tamarra stepped forward. "I've got sewing needles, bone-handled, from the east." The trapper raised an eyebrow. "Show me." She reached into her satchel and pulled a roll of muslin, untying it to reveal 6 needles wrapped in waxed cloth. He examined them, then grunted. "That'll do." Back outside, Nolan helped her tie the hide behind the saddle. "You always carry trade goods?" "I've learned to keep something of value that fits in a pocket," she said. "Needles survive fire and water." "Same can't be said for gold." He looked at her, eyes quiet. "Did someone teach you that?" "My grandmother," she said. "She'd been through worse than I ever will." On the ride home, they passed a line of wagons heading south, families moving ahead of the season. One woman sat hunched by the canvas flap with a bundled infant in her arms. Tamarra watched them pass. "Did you ever want children?" she asked after a long silence. Nolan didn't answer at once. "I used to think I wasn't meant for it, but lately." He looked over. "I think I'd want them." "If they had your eyes," she smiled at that. "Then you'd better hope they don't inherit your stubbornness." He chuckled, low and warm. That night they laid the hide across their bed, the weight of it anchoring the straw mattress. She leaned back against him as they sat before the fire, her shoulders tucked beneath his arm. "I've been thinking," she said, voice soft, "about the women who don't run, who stay because they believe they have no other path. You want to help them. I want them to know there's a way out. That they're not alone." Nolan turned to look at her. "You're brave enough to build something better. I'll follow wherever you lead." She touched his cheek. "Not follow, walk beside," he nodded. A week later, she rode out alone for the first time since spring, a letter tucked in her satchel and a parcel of supplies tied behind her. She was gone 2 days. When she returned, Nolan was fixing the fence by the creek. She handed him the letter. "It's for the widow who runs the schoolhouse. I asked if she'd let me speak to the older girls, teach them how to make things they can keep, how to trade, how to read a map, how to leave if they need to." Nolan read the letter in silence, then folded it carefully. "She says yes. She says she'll listen," Tamarra said. "That's a start." That evening she stood by the garden, watching the last of the squash vines wither back into the soil. Nolan came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "You're planting something new again," he said. She rested her hands atop his. "This time it's not just for us." He kissed the top of her head and they stood there until the sun slipped behind the hill, the sky streaked in deepening gold. The cabin behind them stood solid, smoke curling from the chimney, light spilling through the cloth-curtained windows. Inside, the bed waited, warm beneath the buffalo hide, and the fire would burn steady through the night. Tamarra leaned back against him, her voice barely above the wind. "They said I was promised." Nolan's hand found hers. "They were wrong." She turned toward him, her eyes steady. "You never made me belong to you." He brushed her hair back. "You chose to stay." "I did," she said, "and she always would." By October's close, the wind carried a different kind of hush, one that stilled the trees and pressed low over the land like something waiting. Tamarra stood at the edge of the field behind the cabin, her shawl tucked tight beneath her arms. The last of the garden lay turned beneath the soil, and the ground, newly bare, seemed to breathe in the cold. Inside, Nolan was shaving thin slices of salt pork for the coming week, the iron skillet already warming over the fire. He'd been quieter in recent days, not distant, but thoughtful. Tamarra had noticed the way his eyes lingered on the hills to the west, the way he sometimes stopped mid-task, as if listening for footsteps that never came. When she came back in, he looked up from the table. "Rancher's boy rode down from the big pasture this morning," he said. "Said a deputy passed through town yesterday, had a letter bearing your father's seal." She didn't stop moving, just set the basket of dried herbs on the shelf with calm hands. "He's still trying." "He won't make it past the county line," Nolan said. But I think you ought to write. Tamarra turned. To him, to the magistrate, Nolan said. Have it in your own hand, say what you've lived where you stand, her mouth tightened. If I put it in writing, it's real. It already is, he said. But a voice on paper that leaves no room for anyone else's telling. She sat down across from him, her fingers threading together. I'll write it tonight, but I won't let them take more of me than they already tried. They won't, Nolan said. Not while I draw breath. That night, by oil lamp, she wrote the letter. Her pen scratched slow and sure across the page, her words plain, her tone calm. She named no names beyond her own, made no accusations. She simply laid bare her truth, that she was free, that she had chosen her life, and that no man nor father nor priest had claimed to her anymore. Nolan sealed the envelope himself and took it to town the next morning. When he returned, Tamarra was boiling tallow, the scent of it rising warm through the air. She didn't ask about the ride. He didn't offer detail. Some things didn't need retelling. As November neared, the rancher invited them for supper. They walked the lane together, her hand tucked in the crook of Nolan's arm, the lantern swinging gently between them. At the table, surrounded by old cedar beams and the smell of roasted squash, the rancher's wife leaned across to Tamarra. Words reached as far as Mason, she said. That you're teaching girls to read maps and tie knots, that you've been giving them coins for the mending they do. Tamarra set down her spoon. I only give when they've earned it, the woman smiled. That's what makes it matter. Later, walking home beneath the stars, Nolan said, they're listening now, folks who didn't before. They'll forget soon enough, Tamarra said. No, he said, you've planted something. Might take time, but it'll grow. She looked up at him, the collar of his coat turned up against the wind. And what about us? What are we growing? He stopped walking, turned to face her. A life, one with no debts between us. No ghosts at the door. She leaned into him, her forehead against his chest. Then let's not wait to live it. That winter, they built a second room onto the cabin. Nolan hauled the lumber himself from a sawmill 2 ridges over, and Tamarra helped lift the beams into place with her sleeves rolled and her braid tied back. The room was meant for storing tools and blankets, but they both knew it might be needed for more. On a quiet morning in late December, Tamarra stood at the hearth, a hand resting low against her belly. When Nolan came in from splitting wood, she didn't look up. There's something new, she said. He set down the axe, wiped his palms on his trousers. You sure? She turned, her face still but shining. Yes. He crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around her, his hand sliding to rest where hers lay. Then we'll make a place for them. They didn't speak of names, not yet. But she began stitching in the evenings again, her fingers nimble with the soft thread, and Nolan started carving small things from the leftover pine handles, spoons, a rattle that hardly made a sound yet. When the snow came, it was light and quick to melt, but the cold held. Tamarra made stew from dried beans and root vegetables, and Nolan brought in fresh venison once the traps lay empty. At night, they lay beneath the buffalo hide, her body warmer now against his, her breath deeper in sleep. He would wake sometimes just to watch her, the way her hand curled beneath her chin, the way her hair spilled across the pillow. He thought of all the miles they'd crossed, the silences they'd filled, the names they'd left behind. One morning, come spring, he found her outside kneeling in the garden again, her dress let out at the seams. She looked over her shoulder when he approached. We'll need more rows, she said. More mouths to feed. He crouched beside her, his hand resting where it always seemed to find its place now. I'll build another bench for the porch, a wider one, she smiled. Good, I want them to know this place was made with both our hands. Years passed. Slowly, like sun through thick branches. The child came in the middle of a soft rain, and Nolan caught her himself, his hands steady as stone. They named her Ruth after Tamarra's grandmother, and she grew like the beans, slow, rooted, strong. Tamarra taught the girls in town how to stitch and read contracts. Nolan taught the boys to mend saddle straps and shoot only when they meant it. The cabin grew another room. The garden stretched wider. Tamarra's father sent one last letter, thin, bitter, unopened. She burned it without reading, and Nolan never asked what it said. They grew old without noticing. Not because time passed fast, but because it passed full. Ruth learned to ride before she could tie her own shoes. She inherited Tamarra's quiet fire and Nolan's patient eyes. On warm evenings, they all sat on the porch together, the sun dipping low as Ruth leaned against her mother's side and Nolan whittled his slow, careful shapes. Tamarra watched the horizon, her hand in Nolan's, her breath steady. "I never thought peace would feel like this," she said. He squeezed her fingers. "Like what?" "Like stillness, but not silence." He turned to her, love etched in every line of his face. "You gave us that," she shook her head. "We gave it to each other, and they always would."